Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Consumer Duty Strategies for Success, brought to you by LexisNexis Regulatory Compliance and Protect. My name is Michael Nelson, as you can see, Senior Product Specialist from LexisNexis Regulatory Compliance, and today I'm joined by my colleague Charles Lowe, Senior Business Development Manager for Protect. If you'd like more information about either of us, please feel free to raise your cameras now, and you'll get everything you need about us both through the QR codes currently on the screen. First, a little housekeeping. Today's webinar will run for approximately 30 minutes. There'll be a general introduction about Charles and myself and what we do for our respective organizations. I'll run through a discussion about consumer duty, finishing with some Q&A and some conclusions. In the event that you have any questions, please go to the questions tab in GoToWebinar and the post-webinar questionnaire. And of course, everything will be available to you once the broadcast is concluded. Today, we'll be discussing briefly what consumer duty has come from. Then we'll consider how organizations in the UK are implementing consumer duty, looking at what needs to happen in 2024, and finally, how Protect and LexisNexis can help you get there. So at this point, I'll pass you over to Charles, who can introduce Protect.
Great, thanks very much, Michael. So Protect basically has been working for over 20 years to redefine the way that people think about risk management. And in that time, has put together a complete cutting-edge and cost-effective solution. We've been bringing best practice expertise to over 400 organizations around the world during that time. We provide a complete risk solution comprised of world-class enterprise risk management, compliance, training, and advisory services. And we provide this to large government organizations, key regulators, financial services, and indeed firms and organizations in almost every sector and of every size. That's it.
Thank you very much. And I have to say that Protect and LexisNexis Regulatory Compliance have been partners pretty much from the inception of the regulatory compliance solution, which segues neatly into that. So firstly, LexisNexis. For those people who haven't had the benefit of legal training, LexisNexis has been around for the best part of the last 2 centuries. We started in London with a publication called Butterworths, and over the course of the last 200 years, we've been predominantly guiding people in the legal profession towards best practice outcomes for themselves and their clients. About 7 years ago in Australia, we formed the view that the people who were good at providing advice and guidance to the legal profession with regard to case law and legislation would also be very good at providing the same sort of guidance to people who work in compliance. In the UK, we've got more than 20 particular modules, so areas of law broken up by topic. Those take the form of compliance obligation registers that give you a sense of what your legal obligations are today in a given space. Those are supported by an alerting solution that allows you to get a sense of what's coming in relation to prospective and, when they arrive, actual changes to those legal obligations. We provide content that's best in class, that's current, comprehensive, and most importantly, comprehensible. It's translated out of parliamentary draftees into plain English. The content's written by members of our global team of content experts and vetted by the lawyers that we so regularly work with as part of the work that we do in legal research. We provide our content streamed directly onto the Protect platform so that you can at first glance see not only what you need to do from the legal obligations found there, but also how you can link those obligations to your risks and your policies, your procedures and your controls. Today, we'll look at this particular instance of consumer duty and then how Protect and LexisNexis can collaborate together with you to achieve what you need to in this particular space. So firstly, an overview of consumer duty. The idea behind consumer duty seems to have started, certainly from what I've been able to discern, after the findings of a Royal Commission into the financial services sector in Australia. People who are familiar with that will know that the financial services sector had been perhaps lax in the way that it approached its relations with customers. And what Commissioner Hayne found was that there was a considerable amount of work that organisations in that space needed to do to rectify their relationship with customers. At its core, what it found was that it needed a thorough cultural overhaul in relation to that relationship. And that idea, and of course some of the more particular findings that Commissioner Hayne handed down, seems to have spread across the world. In New Zealand, there was the introduction of the conduct of financial institutions that requires financial institutions over there to have a second license in order to be able to provide the services they do, that demonstrates their commitment to a re-energized and a reinvigorated culture with their customers. Of course, in the EU, there's the introduction of MiFID II that looks at the way that market protections can step in to protect customers. And of course, in the UK, we saw the implementation of consumer duty, which we're talking about today, that at its core reflects what Commissioner Hayne found, was that in order to have a meaningful relationship with their customers, financial services institutions need to review their cultural approach to the products that they provide, what they look like, who they're meant to serve, and roll that cultural change out across the entire organisation. Since consumer duty first became something more than just a distant dot on the horizon, we've seen the following milestones. The final rules and guidances were published back in 2022. Then on 31 October 2022, boards or equivalents should have agreed their implementation plans. April last year, manufacturers should have completed all the reviews necessary to meet the outcome rules for their open products. July, the implementation deadline for new and existing products was arrived at. And then we've got 31 July this year to look forward to for the implementation deadline for both closed products or services and the first of the annual board reports. So inevitably, when we're talking about cultural shift and organisation-wide change, there are some challenges, and I'll pass you over to my colleague Charles to run you through some of those.
Great, thanks very much, Michael. So I guess the place to start here is to look at what the FCA has been putting out about consumer duty, and it's been putting out an awful lot of information. There's been a wealth of CEO letters that have gone out to different sectors. They've provided webcasts and updates. So they've been fairly interactive in trying to help firms on their journey. That said, they did sort of bring all of this together on a webinar on the 6th of December 2023. And if you haven't watched that webinar, it might be a useful thing for you to do. And what we can see here is a very brief summary of what they were talking about. And just without going into too much detail against each of these, so there are some key messages which they've been kind of driving all the way through their approach, which is primarily that it's not a once and done activity. You have to embed this in the culture of your organization. It's going to change the way that you function. And really to treat it as a compliance activity is probably the wrong way of thinking about it. That said, they came up with a number of clear areas which they were looking at. Continuous improvement will be important. They accept that firms are going to have to go on a journey to achieve this, but being able to show that you started in a place and you've improved on that, I think will be very important for you. Data is going to be an essential component of that. In itself, it's not what they're looking for, but it needs the data to be able to provide the interpretive functions that you might apply to it to enable you to understand how you're doing and to be able to present information back. They did highlight a couple of areas where they thought that firms might need to think hard about what they want. So vulnerable customers and the definition and how you look at those will be an important area depending on the sector that you work in. Information sharing, you need to get a 360 view of your client base, your customer base, and you can only do that through appropriate information sharing. And price and value for certain sectors was something that was highlighted as an area that needed improvement. The duty expands this year to closed products. So hopefully firms will be able to take a lot of the learning that they've experienced so far and apply that to their closed product portfolios. And then, of course, the other big thing that's coming up is the first report to the FCA that will be due in the summer. We'll be looking at that in a little more detail, but the essence there is that you should regard this report not just simply as an attestation, but as a governance tool that can demonstrate that you've been applying the duty, thinking about how the duty applies to your organization, to your company, the products and services and processes that make it up. And then finally, the culture and resourcing. There's been a lot of conversation about how the culture of organizations need to change. This was explicitly kind of in the domain of senior management, which is not surprising. It is interesting to think about the fact that you do need more resources to implement the consumer duty, and you could potentially argue that's actually contrary to what the duty is intended to do, which is improve customer outcomes, including price and value. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But that was a brief summary of what was said on December 6th. Since then, they've had one other major piece of documentation come out, which Michael's going to address a little bit later on. Thanks, Michael. Can we move to the next slide?
Of course.
Thanks. So at Protect ERM, we're helping a number of our financial services clients implement the duty in various areas. So I thought it might be useful just to sort of focus on a couple of those to start with, and how we are, sort of what the feedback is from our client base. So one of the first things that they've sort of done is a lot of planning, preparation, creating frameworks, benchmarks, process documents, and so forth. And what they found is, and indeed the FCA highlighted that, was that the firms that have put a lot of thought into their frameworks to establishing what the good customer journey looks like are those that are having the greatest success. So therefore, establishing benchmarks, so your baseline standards, is really critical, and being able to enable all aspects, all elements of the firm, all parts of the business to interact with those is an important part of consumer duty. It's not siloed into just compliance or senior management. Everybody has to engage with it. What we've also seen is that firms with different levels of complexity and different kinds of product offering are finding that journey more or less easy. So at Protect, we work with fairly simple firms, e-payment firms, for example, all the way up through to investment firms, which are quite large and have very complex portfolios. And what that can produce is that within the same organization, you'll have different speeds of travel. Being able to monitor all of those, be able to manage all of that is quite a challenge. So as you can see, I've got that kind of not once and done quote at the bottom. And I think it's really that you're going to have to accept that this, rather like SMCR, for example, once it's implemented, it then it's an ongoing process. I think that's next slide, please, Michael.
No worries.
Great. The other area that we've been particularly involved in, unsurprisingly, given that we're a GRC platform, is on the monitoring of activity. So relevant, accurate, and current data is absolutely essential. The FCA has talked a lot about the data, and whilst the data isn't everything, it's the essential lifeblood to enable you to go to the next stage of evaluating how you're going, monitoring performances, and then reviewing the success of what you've been doing. So it's critical to have good data, and it's critical to be able to facilitate the flow of that data across the organization. Deciding what metrics, what data you want to use will, of course, depend on the products and processes and so forth that you're engaged with. But here you can just see these are ones that we've seen coming up in our client base. So whether sort of definitions around these headings around product suitability, for example, then can help to inform the kind of metrics that you want to capture. And putting those into systems, it could be argued, is really the only way that you can start to manage this on a company-wide basis. It's worth pointing out that it's clear that quantitative data is essential, but equally important is the qualitative interpretation of that data. That's been mentioned on many occasions. So you need to show not only that you've got data there, but you're thinking about what that data means, how the management information is helping you to evaluate your products, your services, your processes against the duties, and ultimately achieving positive outcomes for your consumers. And you also need to be doing this on a continuous basis so that that trend analysis improvement over time is really evident. And that will become very important when it comes to your annual report to the FCA. So again, the quote there I've selected, ongoing and effective monitoring is really essential feed for the board report. This is where it's all going to come through, which we'll look at shortly. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Charles. So, what lies ahead for the balance of the year? As we discussed before, by 31 July this year, firms will have needed to go through where they're at with the closed products that are currently still in market. So what that comprises is obviously a review of those products, seeing which form fall under the regime of consumer duty, and then obviously a review of the related risks and the commercial profile, development of a treatment strategy, and finally an implementation plan that's consistent with what's happening with what you've done with your open products currently. The other interesting thing is that the FCA's already taken a step towards seeing how certain sectors are approaching the issues around consumer duty. Obviously, as I'm sure people on the call are aware, they looked at around 47 banks, predominantly banks, I believe, and looked at 70 different product journeys within those firms. What they found was generally pleasing, but the instances where there seemed to be areas of concern appeared to be common. Looking at business current accounts, making sure that customers had a thorough understanding of the products that they were working with, and looking at the issues that certain firms had when it came to identifying customers in financial difficulties. Ultimately, I think that the points that they raised as part of that multi-firm review were in line with the kinds of issues that we're seeing in Australia. And I can't bring it back to Australia because the design and distribution obligations and the product intervention powers that fell out of the Hayne Royal Commission review and the subsequent legislation that came through subsequent to that seem to be very closely aligned with the way that consumer duty is being employed in the UK. And again, the issues that ASIC are finding themselves involved with now, the corporate regulator here, certainly support the kinds of areas that the FCA is having some concerns about as a result of this review. Now, Charles, tell us more about the annual report.
Yeah, so again, the FCA has been talking quite a bit about this, particularly as it sort of starts to loom on the horizon. And the key thing is that it's this idea that the annual report needs to be evidence of the governance of the organization. So one of the things they said at the end of the year, last year, was this idea that they don't want firms to be reactive. They don't want them to be sitting back and watching what's happening and then waiting for an intervention to help them sort of make their decisions for them. They want firms to be proactive. And I think one of the ways I'll be looking at that, in addition to the kind of reviews and the CEO letters that we've already mentioned, is the report. So this report will probably bring more firms into the kind of scrutiny of the FCA, if I can express it that way, than has previously been the case. So they'll be looking at a whole range of reports to ensure that progress is being made in the way that they want it to be done so. So here, the idea, I think, would be that whilst the firm is running on a day-to-day basis and that's being managed by the executive, the board is there to provide governance and challenge. They must demonstrate that they've been fed the necessary information, they've understood the requirements, and they're scrutinizing and challenging how the firm is progressing in its consumer duty journey and meeting those requirements. It's very clear that it shouldn't be viewed as a tick box compliance activity, but should be demonstrating that the firm has truly considered its approach to the products and services and how those are providing good value to consumers, protecting those that need it. So the metrics and the MI, and this again is where Protect's been doing a lot of work, are critical to enabling that understanding and evidencing that these things have been considered, but of themselves, they're just metrics. What you're looking to do here is to ensure that you can really demonstrate that you've got a handle on what's being required. And I think the FCA has said that they're not looking for perfection initially, but they certainly need to see a direction of travel. And there's a whole range of different things that are going to go into this report. You need to be able to show, for example, that you've got accountabilities, you've got responsibility. You can see that you've got the objectives of the firm are aligned with the objectives of the consumer duty. You can show that you've got your NEDs and your board that have been actively engaged in that journey, that you've got alignment between your governance and risk management frameworks, and then aligning that itself with the duty, that you've got a range of different kinds of both qualitative and quantitative metrics to support your interpretation and your progress, and that you're optimizing as you go along. And again, this is an important thing for the firm itself, in the sense that it costs money, and the more optimized your processes are, the more effective you will be, and indeed deliver the ultimate outcomes of the duties you're trying to achieve. So showing where you've found problems, where you either are planning or have already implemented remedial activities, all of those things will be absolutely critical. Of course, there's no prescribed format for the report itself, so it'll be up to every firm to decide how it wants to present these. But I think that when you consider those things, they will have to be in your report as you sort of compile that and present it to the FCA. Thanks, Michael.
No, my pleasure. So the next step is, having presented you with what you need to do and some of the problems that potentially you might need to consider before arriving at a consumer duty utopia, is looking at how Protect and LexisNexis can help. As I mentioned before, the way that we create an environment for people to better understand their organization's legal obligations is designed to allow people to pinpoint not just what compliance looks like, but the kind of broader organizational structures they need to put into place to maintain compliance. And that strikes me as exactly the kind of thing that consumer duty and the legislation that the FCA is overseeing requires of you. So the first step is to look at the ways that we can help you break down the barriers between the different areas of the organization. And much like organizations' approaches to ESG, is genuinely a requirement that covers the entire organization and their relationship between their customers. The next step is to see what's in scope. And I think obviously there's a fairly tightly knit set of requirements flowing out of the FCA, but it's also, again, worth looking at, seeing, as I mentioned before, where this legislation has come from, and looking at those environments where the concepts behind it have matured to a point. So you might be able to anticipate the kinds of regulatory steps that you might need to step forward into, and also how to respond to those challenges before they become serious challenges. Then, of course, stay on top of what those requirements might be. Inevitably, the FCA will look at the board reports that you're presenting and will provide guidance and feedback, and look at the way that organizations are approaching the issues around both open and closed products to make sure that they've got a thorough understanding of their obligations around consumer duty. Finally, as Charles mentioned before, it's a continuous process. This isn't a checkbox exercise where you can say we're fine and park this until the next annual report. It's something that you need to be constantly on top of, looking at the way that your customers interact with the products that are currently on foot, the way those are designed, the ways those are distributed, to whom those are distributed, what target market determinations you're making, and ensuring that at all times you're staying within the guide rails set down by the consumer duty law. And finally, horizon scanning, seeing what's coming up, anticipating potential problems and solving for them before they become problems that become unsolvable. Within the Protect space, I'll pass you back to Charles.
Thanks, Michael. So Protect offers a GRC SaaS platform. So clearly what we're doing with our clients is helping them on every aspect of the journey on their journeys to consumer duty compliance. And we've broken it down into the sort of the bullets that you can see on the screen here, so that you can understand where each step kind of comes in. But if you think about it more globally, a lot of what's trying to be achieved here is about ensuring that information is effectively being transmitted through the organization. It's not being siloed in certain areas. And as I said earlier, you need input from every element of the organization, or every part of the business needs to be contributing. And to achieve that effectively without using some kind of digital technology is going to be increasingly hard, particularly if you've got limited resources, which presumably most of us have. And you want to sort of improve the effectiveness, the agility, and the efficiency with which you're doing your undertaking your activities. So what we've found is that there's, and certainly in our customer base, that there's been a lot of work done on visualizing that customer journey. Michael mentioned it when the FCA was reviewing the multi-firm review. So understanding that journey and being able to put key points, key milestones, key metrics against that customer journey are absolutely essential. So that then enables you to identify potential weaknesses, to facilitate potential risks and so forth, and to remediate those as you go along. Expert reviews, both internal and external, are probably essential, particularly at this early stage of the implementation of the duty. And then testing and assurance, so ensuring that you've managed the issues that affect your fair value test processes, collecting evidence, support your documentation, attestations, and standardizing a lot of your processes and procedures across the organization, and therefore streamlining your activities, streamlining how your issues are identified and resolved, and then improving the processes that sit behind them. That enables you to engage with in an activity or process, again, of continuous improvement, and documenting what you're doing, looking at those remediations, linking actions to specific outcomes, linking those again to the compliance obligations, so that you can demonstrate that you're thinking about what you're trying to achieve. And all of this then feeds into your governance, not only the data and the metrics, but you can provide this in synthesized forms, in dashboards, reports, which can then be used as the basis for interrogation by the board, and strengthening that oversight across the organization. Linked into that, of course, is continual monitoring and the monitoring of your compliance obligations, which a platform such as Protect ERM is ideally placed to do, and providing the analytics. So you're going to generate an awful lot of data from multiple sources in this process. If you're managing all of that on spreadsheets, that's going to be onerous, and increasingly so. So the ability to have out-of-the-box reports, information, templates, etc., basically at the click of a button, you can get and visualize the management information that you need, is undoubtedly a key benefit that Protect ERM brings to its clients. But overall, Protect ERM is a tool. And I think, going back to what we started with here, the idea of cultural change lies at the heart of what the FCA is trying to achieve here. However, to embody cultural change by changing people's behaviors, which is an integral part of that process, tools such as Protect ERM are really there to help embed that cultural shift by changing the way that people think and do their daily jobs. Thanks, Michael.
No worries. Thank you, Charles. And I think that's a really important point. And obviously, the minutiae that we see in consumer duty is capable of being expanded out. The notion of being compliant is very much one thing, while being able to demonstrate compliance using a tool like Protect, populated by the content that LexisNexis provides, helps you achieve both sides of that particular equation in an easier and more streamlined fashion than might otherwise be achieved. So, closing thoughts. As Charles has pointed out, and I think Nisha Aurora has made it clear, the duty isn't just another piece of legislation. It's something that needs to spark a light in organisations that are subject to the regime, that cause them to consider the kind of products that they're offering, to whom those products are being offered, and what those products look like to a consumer. And to do that properly, of course, it's an organisational-wide review and cultural shift that will ultimately benefit consumers at first instance, but ultimately everyone who works in the financial sector. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you've taken something from what we've shared with you. I know that I always enjoy seeing how Protect work. It is a fantastic platform, and we do have a lot of common customers across the globe. I'd like to thank Charles for all the work that you've put into this and your time today. If you'd like more information about Protect, or would like to request a demo, or would like more information about the kind of content that LexisNexis regulatory compliance can offer, both in the UK and of course around the world, please look at our respective QR codes. But finally, let me thank you for your patience and your attention today. I hope it has been useful, and we'll look forward to sharing another webinar with you soon.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Charles.